Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I'm excited to hear from you all to talk about the issues that matter most to you and the topics that are on your mind right now. I first want to remind everyone to share their questions in the comments section, whether you are watching, whether that is on Facebook, on Twitter, or on YouTube, and we will do our best to get to them. As we speak, we are in the midst of an ongoing uprising over centuries of racial neglect and oppression. We can't talk about the protests in Minneapolis or Kenosha or sports teams nationwide without first looking inward. We maintain a system that grinds millions into desperate poverty, a system that doesn't provide the most basic necessities like food, shelter, and medicine, whether they are brutalized by police, by austerity economics, or by politicians who simply do not care about us. Our nation is crying out desperately for change. We need to fundamentally change the way our society treats its most vulnerable, because this has gone long enough. I want to give a quick update on what we have been up to in the district and what's going to make sure that emergency relief dollars get into the hands of the people in the 5th here in Washington. Since my last virtual town hall with you a month ago, we've also hosted 2 other town halls, one on gun violence prevention with Congressman Thompson from California and district leaders, and one on Social Security with Congressman Larson from Connecticut. You can go and see those town halls, whether it is our monthly one or the ones that are on specific issues, on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. They are all archived there. I also addressed guests at our office's eviction defense workshop. This was a special meeting of our eviction task force that I started in early July to address the potential eviction crisis once the eviction moratorium is lifted. Fortunately, thanks to your advocacy, the eviction moratorium has been extended this month. As you might have heard, the House and the Senate did not come to an agreement over the COVID recovery package, HEROES Act, before the August recess, which was extremely disappointing, especially because the House passed our proposal more than 3 months ago now, providing millions of Americans with a recovery fund. The Senate refuses to even consider a package or negotiate with us until July. My House colleagues and I are committed to getting another package passed into law as soon as possible, which will likely be after Labor Day. The House worked hard to pass our 12 appropriation spending bills to secure funding for programs that are important to the district so we can avoid another disastrous government shutdown like the one we had in 2019. I fought to make sure these bills included strong funding for some of the 5th's biggest priorities. I'm particularly excited that Representative McCollum and I were able to work with the House leadership to make sure these bills included federal dollars to help Minneapolis rebuild from the civil unrest that followed the George Floyd murder. In late July, I introduced the End Polluter Welfare Act with Senator Sanders, which would end federal subsidies for fossil fuel companies, totaling hundreds of billions of dollars over 10 years. I also introduced the Make Billionaires Pay Act last month. This legislation would tax the obscene profits made by billionaires during the pandemic and use those funds to pay for medical expenses of average Americans. Before we get started with questions, I wanted to quickly cover different ways my district office can help you. If you have an issue with any government entity, my office will do everything that we can to help you ourselves and get you connected with the people who can. You can request help through my website or by calling our office at 612-333-1233. 1272, or emailing us at mn05.info@mail.house.gov. I also want to remind everyone to get counted through the census. Each year, Minnesota receives about $15 billion from the federal government based on the numbers from the census, going to essential programs like Medicaid, SNAP, highway planning, and construction. We recently learned that the census is planning to suspend door knocking here in Hennepin County. So it's all on us to head to census.gov and get counted. And with that, we can get started with questions. As your questions come in, I'll start with the ones that have come into our office this past week. So one of the questions that we've received repeatedly is that what are we doing to protect the postal office? Is our region experiencing the same impacts we've seen in other parts of the country? And just ongoing issues with the postal office. It is my understanding that it is really important for us to protect the postal service. During the pandemic, we are relying on them for so many aspects of our daily lives, whether it is medication, food, or other necessities, as well as for our critical right to vote. As many of you know, I'm a daughter of a former postal worker, and I used to myself work at the postal office. I know firsthand how hard mail carriers work to make sure that our letters and packages arrive every single day. We've been working closely with the post office, Northland District, through the year, from setting up mobile units in Minneapolis following the unrest, to ensuring all apartments are receiving mail throughout the pandemic, and now to ensuring that our system is functioning properly as more and more people rely on vote by mail. For the primary, every ballot mailed in Minneapolis on or before primary day was counted. That was a big victory for us here in the 5th. The USPS even had a mail carrier drive a single ballot up to Bemidji to make sure it arrived on time. We received reports that an apartment building in South Minneapolis stopped receiving mail. We checked in with local postmaster and learned that the mail carrier didn't follow policy when deciding to halt delivery there. USPS has clarified their policy with that mail carrier. I know this is scary when we need the mail for essentials. We also need to make sure mail carriers stay safe from COVID. There have been dozens of COVID cases among USPS staff in the district. Protecting the postal office means protecting the mail carriers as well. Thankfully, we haven't seen the level of service disruption locally that has been reported nationally. But if you're experiencing delivery delay on seeing the removal of blue post boxes, please give our office a call or send us an email. I have co-sponsored bills to protect the USPS, including the Delivery for America Act, which has recently passed by the House and would prevent any of the recent operational changes proposed by Trump's Postmaster General, and provide USPS with $25 million in emergency funding. So we are doing everything that we can, and we'll stay at it. If you experience issues yourself, or if you're still concerned, please let us know. Another question that has come in is that what is the current status of the eviction moratorium? what is being done to address the potential eviction wave if the moratorium is lifted, and what is the status of the governor's $100 million housing assistance program. Currently, as I said earlier, the eviction moratorium is still in place on both the state and federal level. The Department of Housing and Urban Development recently extended the federal moratorium throughout the end of the year, and the governor's executive order was extended until September 11th. As long as the peacetime emergency is in place, we should be able to have the eviction moratorium. The governor has to continually extend the peacetime emergency, and the moratorium is tied to that every month as part of using his executive powers. And the Republicans in the Minnesota House, in the Senate, are working really hard to try to get rid of his emergency powers. And so we have to support the governor and make sure that our legislators are supported so that he does continue to have the ability to protect all of us. At the moment, we do not foresee an end to the eviction moratorium, but we should know in advance if the governor plans to lift it, and we'll give you an update on that. With our eviction task force, the governor's staff are part of that, and we have a lot of state legislators who are leading advocates on that eviction moratorium that also serve on our task force. And so stay tuned for those conversations as well. Another question that has come in is, what can people do to protect themselves? And so we believe it is important that people understand, even though the eviction is in place, that there are, some landlords who are still carrying out evictions. And so the landlords can evict you if you have a lot of property damage. Landlords can end your lease if they or one of their family members plans to live in the house. Your landlord still has to follow the lease and the law. They have to give you a written notice saying that the lease is ending. Usually your landlord has to give you notice at least a month before the lease ends. Your landlord has to give you a written notice warning you that they are going to file an eviction case against you. Your landlord has to give you the notice at least 7 days before filing the eviction. And if you are facing any of the situations I just described and you are in need of support, please reach out to Minnesota Legal Aid, Homeline, or Law Help MN. You can also reach our office as well, and we can try to get you direct support. Evictions for non-payment are covered through the eviction moratorium and cannot take place as long as it's in effect. If your landlord is trying to evict you due to non-payment, please reach out to AG Ellison's office and fill out his tenant eviction complaint form. He has been a strong advocate and is working really hard. And so rely on his office if there are ways in which you feel your landlord is violating the eviction moratorium at the moment. At the beginning of July, as I said earlier, we started the eviction task force to work on preventing an eviction surge once the moratorium is lifted. Organizations, community advocates, and local and state governments are all working to ensure Minnesota does not have a surge of evictions. We're all working together to push for a long-term solution to our housing crisis. And we've also been fighting really hard to ensure housing assistance funds for renters and homeowners are included in the next federal package, along with an extension of eviction and foreclosure moratoriums. They're also included in the HEROES Act that was passed in the House. And as we've talked about many a times, I've authored legislation that will take that a step farther by canceling all rent and mortgages through the remainder of the pandemic. Instead, having the federal government cover those costs for working Americans. The governor's COVID-19 housing assistance program is now open to the public. Individuals and families can apply for those funds that they can use for their housing related costs. The goal of the program is to help individuals and families in Minnesota maintain housing and prevent eviction and homelessness. The program pays unpaid housing related bills directly where the bill is due. Examples include rent and mortgage payments, utility payments, homeowners insurance, manufactured home payments, and park lot rents. Applications are available in Spanish, in Hmong, in Somali, and English, and there's a central intake process via phone, text, or online. There is no cap of the amount of assistance that you can get, and limited eligibility requirements. They are expansive because we're trying to cover as many people as possible. To determine your eligibility and get your questions answered directly, please call 211 or the toll-free number 1-800-543-7709 or locally 651-291-0211, or you can visit 211unitedway.org. Let's see if we have any other questions. What help is available for small businesses, small business owners affected by COVID and civil unrest? In a time where minority-owned businesses were already being disproportionately affected by the pandemic, these same businesses have been the least likely to receive federal help. In fact, in the first round PPP funding, 90% of funding, 90% of the minority-owned businesses were denied a loan. On top of that, the murder of George Floyd resulted in hundreds of millions of dollars damage to the business district, again, disproportionately affecting minority businesses. What's our office doing? There must be direct and accessible and flexible financial relief with funds specifically reserved for minority businesses, minority-owned businesses. At the beginning of the pandemic, we introduced the ABLE Act, which would require the federal government to fully compensate maintenance costs of all affected small businesses from substantial economic injury as a result of the COVID shutdown impacts. Additionally, my office is working on an emergency economic relief bill to help local businesses that are working to recover from the recent civil unrest. I've met with business owners at Minnehaha and Lake, Mercado Central, and the West Bank Broadway Coalition. We are incorporating feedback from constituent business owners and economic development organizations on the legislations that we've worked on so far. What is currently available? Earlier this month, SBA announced that low-interest disaster loans will be available for Minnesota businesses that were damaged between May 27th and June 8th after the George Floyd murder. If you have any questions about that particular program, please reach out to our office. Grants can offer critical financial relief to small businesses, but they change frequently. The best way to learn about currently available grants is to contact our office directly. And to learn more about resources that can help your small business, please, again, call our office at 612-333-8255 1272, or email us at mno5.info@mail.house.gov, and we'll put out this information on Facebook so you can access that information as well. With schools reopening, what should we be doing to keep our families safe? Is the next question that has come in. The COVID-19 pandemic has hurt us more ways than we could have possibly thought about just a year ago. Right now, there is no cure or vaccine, and it is our responsibility as a community to make sure that there are good choices out there for our frontline workers, for one another, and ways for us to minimize the devastation this disease has caused. And I know it is hard, and it is really important for us to remember to stay vigilant and to keep ourselves and our loved ones safe. And we do that by wearing a mask, especially when we are indoors. We do that by washing our hands as often as possible and as truly as possible. And we do that by staying home when we can. It's also important for us to try to see a doctor as routinely as possible, and to continue with our child wellness check-ins, and to get support for chronic illnesses. And we must remember to continue to get our vaccines. Flu shots are going to be very critical this year, and we want to make sure that hospitals and healthcare workers aren't overwhelmed. So make sure that you are making appointments as in advance as you can. Some pharmacies have made these flu shots available for folks, and many are offering gift cards in return for getting your flu shot. Plus, a recent study showed that flu shots have some protective effects against COVID-19. And I also want to mention that COVID-19 has shown us how fragile our current healthcare system is, and laid bare why Medicare for All is so critical. COVID is a global emergency, and Medicare for All is really a moral imperative. Medicare for All would mean universal coverage for testing, treatment, and eventually a vaccine. It would be free, and there'd be no need to deal with the profit-driven private healthcare insurance companies. Last month, we introduced the Make Billionaires Pay Act, which would leverage a wealth tax on our nation's wealthy billionaires. And we directed that funding to help cover Medicare in order for us to pay for the caring of all Americans. The new tax that I'm proposing would raise about $421 billion in revenue, enough to pay for all of the out-of-pocket healthcare expenses for everyone in America for an entire year. These are times for us to think about solutions that really meet the scale of the problem. And this is one of the solutions that we are working to address that. Let's see. So our next question is about school reopening. Where are schools in terms of reopening? Their reopening plans. What has the governor announced? At the end of July, the governor announced the following guidance around 3 scenarios to help schools plan for the 2021 school year. Scenario 1, in-school learning for all students. Scenario 2, hybrid learning with strict social distancing and capacity limits. Scenario 3, distance learning only. The plan gives parents the option to keep children at home if they are uncomfortable having their kids return to in-person classes, which means all schools need to have distance learning options available. The school reopening plan involves 2 major components. It asks that schools decide their plans of action based on the severity of the COVID-19 pandemic in their communities. Additionally, it requires schools to ensure their buildings are configured to allow for social distancing. Students and teachers and staff will be provided with masks and other tools to ensure everyone's safety. In the fifth, the majority of the school districts seem to be focusing on a hybrid model or starting with distance learning options that will allow them to move into a hybrid model, in-person and online instructions. Many of you know I'm the mother of 3 school children. 2 of my kids attend the Minneapolis public schools. And it is really, a very difficult situation in trying to decide whether to continue to push, right, our system into allowing for our children to achieve the best educational possible to them, which we all know is in a classroom, and what it means for us to keep them safe, to keep the teachers and the school staff safe, and essentially keep our whole community safe. The response to this pandemic was so devastating that now we're still at a place where these choices aren't an easy one. And so for me, I know, my daughter who is going into her senior year this year, and my son who is going to be a freshman, are both really devastated by their inability to be in a class and have a cohort and experience everything that you expect to experience as a freshman and as a senior. But they also understand how important it is for us to really think through everything and to prioritize our safety and figuring out ways in which as a community we continue to do that. And so there are creative ways as we struggle with these choices that we can continue to give that experience and keep our kids on track. I know many families don't have a lot of resources. I also think about kids who are in the system, in the foster care system, kids who are living with parents who might be experiencing homelessness, and what it means for people who are already being failed by our system to now experience further failures. And these are the conversations I have with our governor and the superintendents across our state. And I know that everyone is working really hard to try to come up with the best solutions that they have, given these devastating circumstances we all find ourselves. And so I will ask all of you to be as patient as you can, and for all of us to lean on one another as community members to fill in that gap where people might not have the resources, or our children might not have the resources to be able to get through this. But I know as a community, when we continue to lean on one another, we will make it through, and our kids will be better for it. Our next question is about the census. What is the current plan around census data collection based on the new timeline? What is being done to address the cut in the data collection timeline? Can people still complete their census, and how much longer? What is Minnesota's status, and where are we struggling to count people and communities? The census is really crucial for us here in Minnesota this year. The census again serves as a vital foundation of our democracy by and for the people, by counting people of all ages, races, and ethnic groups, regardless of their citizenship status. The census determines our political representation. It helps shape how billions of dollars in federal funding is distributed to the state and local communities every year. And each year, Minnesota receives $15 billion from the federal government based on the numbers from the census, going to essential programs like Medicaid, SNAP, highway planning, and construction. The 2020 census is currently underway. Minnesota is continuing to lead with the highest self-response rate in the country, 72% compared to the national average, which is 64%. However, our participation in Minnesota is not uniform. Rural and denser urban areas are lagging. Additionally, accurately counting our historically undercounted communities is going to be more of a challenge due to COVID-19. We need to continue to ensure everyone is counted in the census. Unfortunately, the Census Bureau recently announced a new timeline with data collection ending in September. With this major change, we need to continue to spread the message on completing your census. A lot is at stake. To be counted is to be seen and represented, and to ensure you and your family have the access that they need in order to have the resources and the services that will help all of us thrive. The Census Bureau claims that all households have not yet completed the census, have had the census trackers on each door in at least 6 times. However, there is evidence that many households in Minneapolis have not yet been contacted, and many of them have not gotten that 6th knock at their doors in order to have a non-response follow-up plan. In 2020 census, the 2020 census has been under attack in many ways. Trump continues to use scare tactics. The COVID-19 pandemic and multiple challenges to the census timeline are just few to name. This is truly unacceptable. This could have an extremely negative impact on our community for the next 10 years. And it is important that we recognize that we need to do everything that we can to count every single person in our community. And so if you are part of historically marginalized community, whether that is renters, students, immigrants. This is even particularly more important. In Congress, we've signed on letters to encourage House leadership to add census funding to the next federal package, and another to the Census Bureau, expressing our concerns with cutting a month off of the census data collection period. Our partners and advocates on the ground are working extremely hard to ensure all Minnesotans get counted with the new timeline, but also pushing to extend the timeline to ensure that there is an accurate count. Census takers have begun household interviews to engage individuals and families who have not yet completed their census form. If you haven't, please take a moment to complete your census by phone, by mail, or online. And you can visit my2020census.org to complete your census. So we have a question. I haven't gotten my stimulus payment or refund yet. Can you help me? So you should have by now received your first stimulus check. If you haven't, again, please contact our office and we will see how, if we can assist you in tracking that directly. We'll put down the phone number and the email address again to that as well. And we're currently pushing for a next stimulus check, $1,000 or $1,500 for the span of many months isn't really helpful to a single person in our communities who has to pay rent, feed their children, pay for all the other essential needs that people have. What exceptions are there for the executive orders suspending work visas, immigration visas? How can I get assistance? So our office does a lot of work in regards to immigration. And before I answer the question, I will just again reiterate that if you do have any immigration related questions or need support or resources, please don't ever hesitate to contact our office directly in order for us to assist you in that. Trump and his cronies have used the pandemic to justify a lot of horrible changes to immigration policy that have nothing to do with keeping us healthy or rebuilding our economy. In fact, they're doing the opposite in almost every in almost every imaginable way. Some of the biggest changes Trump has enacted during the pandemic are restricting a new immigrant visa, like grandparents or siblings of US citizens, restrictions on employment visas, like au pairs and skilled workers, with HIPs and their families and international students, and another border closure with Canada and Mexico, plus bans on travel to the US if you have been to certain parts of the world within 2 weeks before you are likely to enter the United States. One of the main things that we have seen with the Trump administration is that he governs towards tweets, and his agencies have no idea how to implement the policies the White House puts forth. Even if a US embassy approves a waiver to one of these restrictions, a customs or border protections agent can make an entirely different determination based on the person when they arrive in the United States. On top of that, the Government Accountability Office just released a report that two of Trump's main immigration appointees have been in their positions illegally. That means that all of the regulations we have put in the last year will be subjected to tons of lawsuits, that they aren't eligible, they aren't legitimate. And it's an absolute nightmare for so many people. Now, getting to the exceptions, there are a lot of carve outs in these policies. Some of the biggest exceptions are for healthcare workers and their families, and for those who work for government or critical infrastructure. There are also a lot of exceptions for workers who would help the economy recover. If you are working with an attorney, they will be able to help you throughout this process. And our office can help provide a support letter to help you make your case. My office can also help make sure that you get direct case work within our office, and directly are working with government. We don't get to make the ultimate decision, but we will do everything that we can to argue on your behalf, and we can help expedite the case if you're facing a dire financial or humanitarian situation due to the delays. And so that number to call our office again is 612-333-1272. And this again is an issue that is deeply close to my heart and the heart of the folks that work in our office. So if you're experiencing any difficulties in navigating the really disastrous immigration policies under Trump, please call our office and we will be able to help with that as well. So we have like 10 more minutes. I'll try to see if I can take a few of these questions. Um, what are you doing in Congress to combat systematic racism? Has any Congress passed anything since the murder of George Floyd? I think for many, it's been really easy to um, chant Black Lives Matter, to have a banner, to tweet about it. Um, and the idea of legislating um, value and investment into Black lives um, is one that many of us are pushing and have been pushing for in Congress. After George Floyd was murdered, within exactly a month, he was murdered on the 25th of May. On the 25th of June, we passed the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which essentially bans chokeholds. It bans the no-knock warrants. It gets rid of qualified immunity. It creates a national database. And it is one of the most transformative um, policing pieces of legislation that has ever passed Congress. And for us, we understand how important it is to really look at um, the ways in which our communities have long lived in terror from law enforcement sworn to protect us, and putting pieces of legislation together that address that is one of the biggest steps forward that we could take. And the Senate hasn't taken up this legislation. And yesterday we were in DC marching um, and advocating for the Senate to take that up, and for us to really employ the president to sign these pieces of legislation into law. If truly people say they care about Black lives, then we have to have that be part of the legislation that we are moving forward. We've also introduced a package of bills that deal with the ways in which police interact with folks who are coming out and participating in protests. I introduced legislation to criminalize police violence against protesters. My bill would allow any officer who kills or causes bodily harm to a civilian doing the response to a protest be charged with a federal crime, because we must ensure that our constitutional rights are protected, and for there not to be any threats or stiflement by law enforcement, who are essentially in charge of protecting people's constitutional rights. We've also proposed legislation to create a national police misuse of force investigation board. This will establish a federal agency responsible for investigating all nationwide deaths occurring in police custody, officer-involved shootings, and use of force that result in bodily injury. The agency will conduct unbiased, independent investigation and issue determinations of responsibility and recommendation, so that any future violence can be prevented. We've also introduced legislation to amend the Insurrection Act, because we have seen really having a president like Trump, and giving him the ability to deploy the military domestically, how that could be dangerous, and how he will use that threat to terrorize people from practicing their constitutional right to dissent, to protest, to be in the streets. And this allows for us to have a congressional oversight over those actions. And as we have moved forward with policies to transform our criminal justice and policing system, we have also proposed policies to create investment, because it is not just a conversation about whether we support defunding resources or support budgets that invest in less harm to our communities, in less policing to our communities. It is about the investment that can be created in budgets when you have policymakers that truly want to put action behind, right, their rhetoric of I stand with Black Lives Matter. And so we are asking for people, whether it is in municipalities, in state houses, or in Congress, to join us in policies that create economic and social investment in our communities, to say that this is the time that we must address the social and economic neglects that have brought us to this moment. And if we don't meet this moment, we will continue to have these persistent injustices in our communities, and we will continue to have unrest in our streets because there's been unrest in people's lives. We will continue to have a system that is not a reflection of every single person who is living under it. We will continue to see a break in the social contract between government and its people, between neighbors, between communities and businesses. And so there is really ways in which that we can address this neglect that will allow for our communities to flourish, will allow for us to address the racism that is within our systems, that will allow for us to address the injustices, and that would allow for us to make amends with a history of enslavement, of brutality, of othering that has led to not only mass incarceration, but it's led to lack of healthcare, lack of assets being built, lack of investment in the environment in which Black communities exist in. And so this is a system that is failing our communities, and if we don't address that system holistically, we will continue to find ourselves in this cycle of unrest and injustice, and violence and brutality and trauma and hurt and pain. And it is time for us to be able to think through and find ways in which we can holistically not only heal, but come out of this moment that we are in, with better systems that truly uplift and uphold the essence of what our Constitution is supposed to do. Let me see. I think we have a question we have time for one more question. So our last question here, it will be, do you think Medicare for All will pass in Congress? Do you think this pandemic changed the mind of other members of Congress to support a Medicare for All system? So before the 116th Congress, which is the one that we are currently in, policies like Medicare for All didn't really have a lot of support. And because so many people who were running for Congress ran on supporting Medicare for All, we now have over 140, I think, members who are currently signed as co-signers of the Medicare for All legislation. And because of that, we have been able to secure 4 hearings in different committees of jurisdiction, including the Ways and Means, which is really one of the most important committees for that bill to have a hearing in. And as the vice chair of the Medicare for All caucus, we have been really proud of the fact that we've helped secure these hearings to take place. And what I do know is that in the 117th Congress, we are going to get so many new people who also have now run on their support for guaranteeing healthcare for everyone. And that adds to the number of people who will be co-signers of this piece of legislation. And that in itself really is a very promising thing, because we know that we are all going to get sworn in 2021. What year are we in? In 2021. And we're going to have a different cohort, right, of people who are not only supporters, but enthusiastic supporters, which means they bring some colleagues with them as well. And we will see that number of co-signers grow from this Congress to the next Congress. But what I've also seen is that there's been a shift in the way in which people think about a universalized healthcare system that is not based on for-profit, and that is what this pandemic has done. It's laid bare the disaster in our for-profit healthcare system that has really made it so that 5.4 million people um, would just overnight lose their healthcare coverage because it was tied to their employment, and make so many people who were already without health insurance, who were living with um, chronic illnesses, be disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. Um, here in Minnesota, 50% of Black Minnesotans are either uninsured or underinsured. And that is true for many Black communities across our country. And it is also true that this pandemic has had a devastating and disproportionate impact on the Black community. And that those numbers are also very true for Native Americans. They're also true for um, Latinos. They're true for every community that has been living in the margins of society. And what I am hearing in Congress is that there are a lot of people who want us to figure out a system that fully cares for each and every person here in America, that fully provides healthcare coverage to people. And there is a disconnect sometimes, which it's really hard to not see the irony when people will say, we want these vaccines to be free for everyone. We want care with the pandemic to be free for everyone, and without realizing that if we already had that system, we would have less problems today. And this idea that we continually push our problems to the side and allow them to compound, and try to backfill, and not realize how that's more costly, whether it is financially or with lives, is really tragic. And to me, it is important for us to recognize that we are past a system where we continue to backfill. This is the time for us to see all of our systems that have been laid bare, and their failures have been laid bare. And for us to say we are going to truly reform all of these systems, and make sure that the people get the resources and the support that they need, and figure out a way to not only pay for it, but to continue to support it. We didn't need things like Social Security or Medicaid for all, Medicaid, to have been backfilled, right? Like, we understood they were important policies, and we provided those, and we continue to expand and support those systems. And that's what Medicare for All, and things like Homes for All will do. They will create that coverage for everyone, and it's going to be on us and the next generation to continue that expansion and continue to support those systems in their existence. What we are seeing today needs to bring us to a better tomorrow. We can no longer ignore the kind of broken housing system we have, the kind of broken healthcare system that we have, the kind of broken criminal justice system that we have, the broken policing system that we have, and not address it. And this is what this pandemic of public health has done, and what this pandemic of racism has done. It's laid bare these systematic problems that we have in our country. And it's going to be up to us to meet that moment with systematic changes that will create the transformation that our country needs in order to live up to its promise. And with that, I will see you all next month with our next town hall. And hopefully, once we get a hold of this pandemic, we can reassume having these town halls in person, and I can actually hear you all ask questions and have it be interactive. With that, have a great, wonderful Saturday. And thank you so much again for joining us and for giving me the honor of representing you in Washington.